Hello, and welcome to Crime Talkline. In this podcast, we will be speaking about the many crime bosses and how they made their way in the world and how they rose to power. In this episode, we will speak about Al Capone and the Chicago outfit and his many enemies in his rise to power. Hope you enjoy. Al Capone, also known as Scarface or Big Al, was born on the 17th of January 1899 in Brooklyn, New York, United States. He lived with his mother and father, with his 6 brothers and 2 sisters in a small 3-bedroom apartment, with his father being a barber. Al Capone quit school after the 6th grade and associated with a notorious street gang called the 5 Point Gang, becoming an accepted member. John Toro was the street gang leader and Al Capone used to run errands for him. He was also his mentor in becoming who he was. After time, Johnny Toro moved to Chicago for business reasons, and before he left Al Capone with Frankie Yale, one of the most feared hitmen in New York. He was a barman in Frankie's bar, as this was before he was violent. In 1917, still working as a barman, he was chatting up a woman when a local gangster came in and cut him on his cheek, neck, throat, chin, giving him the name Scarface. After the knife fight, Al Capone spent months recovering. In 1919, still working in the bar, he starts dating a girl called Mary Josephine. After a few months, she becomes pregnant and they get married. After he realises he doesn't have enough money to support his wife, he becomes muscle for Frankie and was asked to get some cash from a low-level gangster. He kills him seconds after meeting him, as he doesn't have the money and he was intimidating him. That was Al Capone's first kill. About 1920, Toro invited Capone to Chicago, where he became an influential lieutenant in the Lismo mob, which would later become known as the Chicago outfit. When he came into Chicago, he helped run casinos, brothels for Toro. Toro wanted to move up into selling illegal liquor, as prohibition law had just been started, but Big Jim Colismo didn't want to become a bootlegger and didn't want any of his men touching alcohol. Toro later killed him and took over the outfit, as Al Capone being second in charge. While bootlegging in Chicago, an Irish gang called North Side Gang, led by Dini O'Banion, didn't like them selling on their turf and started tipping over Toro's trucks of beer and selling at their own cost. There was a strong rivalry between them. Toro convinced Dini O'Banion to split the turf, and he sells whiskey and Toro sells beer. It worked for 3 years until O'Banion wasn't satisfied with what he got in return, and he had a big impact in making Toro's man mayor for Cicero. Cicero was the town in Chicago where Al Capone and Toro operated for the first half of their operation. He also didn't like the fact that Toro and Al Capone used prostitutes, as O'Banion was very Catholic and looked down on them for that. In 1924, O'Banion tried to frame Toro and Al for the murder of North Side associate John Duffy. This didn't work out, and they were at war with each other. Not long after, he had heard that one of the police will be raiding one of their breweries in May 1924 and will be shutting it down. With his hat in his hand, O'Banion approached Toro, asking him to buy him out for $500,000. In today's money, that would be about $6.2 million. There are 3 strikes in the bootlegging law. The first one is a fine, the second one is 2 years, and the third one depends on the judge, which can be between 10 and 20 years. Toro had already been arrested for bootlegging once, and if he got arrested, he would have been gone away for 2 years. In May 19th, 1924, the rivals met and closed a deal with a handshake. Moments later, police bust in because it was O'Banion's first offence. He was let off on a fine, but John Toro was sent to jail. Toro demanded for his money back, but O'Banion said no. O'Banion had a flower store, which was known as his base of operation. On November the 10th, 1924, O'Banion was murdered in his flower shop by Al Capone's men. Many people say it was Al Capone's old friend Frankie Yale and 2 of Toro's gunmen, John Scalise and Albert Al Selby. It's told that 2 men walked in at first and were looking at flowers. Then a third one walked in, grabbed O'Banion's hand in a greeting, and the other 2 gunmen moved up to O'Banion, pulled out pistols and started shooting at him, killing him. After the murder of O'Banion, Jaime Weiss became in charge of the gang. In revenge of the death of O'Banion, the first thing he did in charge was shoot up Al Capone's car with him in it, but he failed and Al Capone survived. They later went after Toro and they shot Toro. Toro survived his attack and fled to New York to retire, leaving Al Capone in charge of the outfit. Al Capone being in charge, he started to end his rivalry once and for all and went to war with Jaime Weiss. Jaime Weiss was then killed on 11th of October 1926 outside the Holy Name Cathedral, 2 years after his successor O'Banion. Next in charge was one of O'Banion's closest friends, Vincent Juicy. Juicy came from a Sicilian descent and before his life of crime was in the Navy, but after he was discharged he began committing petty crimes. He started working with his childhood friend O'Banion, Jaime Weiss and Bugs Moranis. After time, the war got worse as Al Capone got angrier and angrier as his men died by Juicy. Juicy was always getting picked up by the police for many crimes, one of them being carrying weapons, knives and guns. A cop called Dan Healy, who wasn't corrupt and didn't take bribes from anyone and was heavily involved in the taking down of the Northside gang. Healy grabbed Juicy in the arm, pushing him along as they entered the courthouse. Juicy objected and threw out an insult about Healy, who responded by slapping the lethal gangster in the face. He then pulled out his served revolver, thrusting it in his side and giving the Northsider a stern warning. After they entered the courthouse, the arguing continued and what happened next was a matter of dispute. Healy said that Juicy had lunged for Healy's gun, but Healy had drawn back and accidentally shot Juicy. This was backed up by 3 cops that were with him, but people who were arrested with Juicy say that the fight happened between them after Healy punched Juicy in the face. Healy got out and shot him on the 4th of April 1924. The next boss in charge was Bugs Moran, who was also kind of boss with Juicy. After time, Capone grew his empire bigger and bigger, moving into a 5-star hotel which was his base of operation while the Northside gang was still trying to kill him. Al Capone had an amazing idea which will go down in mob history: the St. Valentine's Day Massacre on February the 14th, 1929. Al Capone's idea was to go on holiday to Florida for a few weeks. While he was in Florida, 7 associates of the Northside gang were gunned down by Al Capone's men, disguised as police officers. Bugs Moran was not there at the time of the murders, but the hit on the 7 guys showed how powerful he was. In the early 1930s, Moran quit the gang life and left the area and started doing moral fraud and robbery like his earlier life. He then went to prison in 1930. After the events of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, Prohibition agent Elliot Ness started taking down Capone with his group of untouchables. This is seen in the film The Untouchables, as you may know. On February the 28th, 1931, Capone was found guilty in federal court on the contempt of charge and was sentenced to 6 months in Cook County Jail. His appeal on the charge was dismissed. In addition to Al Capone, his brother Ralph Capone, Jake Guzik, Frank Nitti and other mobsters were subject to tax fraud, and other mobsters were subject to tax evasion charges. On June 16, 1931, Capone pled guilty to tax evasion and prohibition charges. He then boasted to the press that he had stuck a deal for 2.5 years sentence, but the judge informed him that the deal was not bound. Capone then changed his plea to not guilty. On October 18, 1931, Capone was convicted after trial and on November the 24th was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison, fined $50,000 uncharged, $7,000 for court costs, in addition to $215,000 plus interest due on black taxes. The 6-month contempt of court sentence was to be served. While awaiting for the results of the appeal, Capone was confined to Cook County Jail. Upon denial of appeal, he entered the U.S. Penitentiary of Atlanta, serving his sentence there at the Alcatraz prison. On November the 16th, 1939, Al Capone was released after having served 7 years 6 months and 15 days. He had been damaged greatly in his confinement. Immediately on his release, he entered a Baltimore hospital for brain treatment and then went to his Florida home, an estate on Palm Island in Biscayne Bay near Miami. In 1946, his physician and a Baltimore psychiatrist, after examination, both concluded Al Capone had the mentality of a 12-year-old. Capone resided on Palm Island with his wife and immediate family in a secluded atmosphere until his death due to a stroke and pneumonia on January 25th, 1947. After the events of Al Capone's death, the Chicago outfit is still out there to this day, active and committing crimes and doing racketeering. After the death of Al Capone, the remaining members moved to LA and started working on films and stuff with Mickey Cohen. You may have heard of him back in the 50s. He also went down and a lot of stuff happened back then. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed.